All right. Welcome, everyone. This is Mr. Ocampo here with Chapter 5 of Things Fall Apart. I am so sorry. Today is the 1st of February, and it feels like I just woke up. I made a big mistake, big oof, on Friday when we were supposed to do this. I had started streaming, and I'm pretty sure that I am doing it right now. I started streaming, but I forgot to hit go live. So, let me just check to make sure. Yep, says I'm live. So everything is okay right now. We're good. We are good to stream. I went through the entire thing. It just, because I'm used to no one talking to me. So I thought, like, all right, just no one's saying anything. So I'm just going to keep going. I didn't realize it was because I didn't press go live. So I apologize if I kind of had you guys wasting your time waiting for me on Friday. We are back at it today with chapter 5 and 6. So some of you may have already had this in class. You've already went through the lecture with your teacher, but if you haven't, catch this. And if you've missed it, you can follow along with me as we read it, and you are watching the replay. All right, here we go. Chapter 5 of Things Fall Apart. Sorry, I need my inhaler. Give me a second. This is like a regular thing now. Hold on. Okay. Things Fall Apart, Chapter 5. The Feast of the New Yam was approaching, and Umofia was in a festival mood. It was an occasion for giving thanks to Ani, the earth goddess, and the source of all fertility. Ani played a greater part in the life of the people than any other deity. She was the ultimate judge of morality and conduct, and what was more, she was in close communion with the departed fathers of the clan whose bodies had been committed to earth. The Feast of the New Yam was held every year before the harvest began to honor the earth goddess and the ancestral spirits of the clan. New yams could not be eaten until some had first been offered to these powers. Men and women, young and old, looked forward to the New Yam festival because it began the season of plenty, the new year. On the last night before the festival, yams of the old were all disposed of by those who still had them. The new year must begin with tasty, fresh yams and not the shriveled and fibrous crop of the previous year. All cooking pots, calabashes, and wooden bowls were thoroughly washed, especially the wooden mortar in which yam was pounded. Yam fufu and vegetable soup was the chief food in the celebration. So much of it was cooked that no matter how heavily the family ate or how many friends and relatives they invited from the neighboring villages, there was always a large quantity of food left over at the end of the day. The story was always told of a wealthy man who set before his guests a mound of fufu so high that those who sat on one side could not see what was happening on the other, and it was not until late in the evening that one of them saw for the first time his in-law, who had appeared during the course of the meal, and had fallen to on the opposite side. It was only then that they exchanged greetings and shook hands over what was left of the food. Like, I remember before COVID, it was such a big thing to gather with family for the New Year's. And we would have this tradition. My family would make sure that all of us kids, me and my cousins, we would find as much change as we could, like in the couches to kind of help with the cleaning you too. Like find change in the couches and in in places where it's hard for adults to reach, and we would find change like coins and place them in tin cans or jars, like glass jars, like old spaghetti jars, like spaghetti sauce, and tin cans of like spam and stuff like that. And we would seal it, and then when it was midnight for New Year's, all of us cousins would have to jump up and down really vigorously, and then shake the cans and full of coins. And that was like a couple of traditions there. Number one, the jumping up and down, like the higher you jump, the more you're gonna grow, right? I guess I didn't jump very high because I am only 5'3". The cans full of coins. Number one, the more coins you had, the more wealth you were going to have in the upcoming year. And the shaking of the can made a lot of noise. It was like a makeshift noisemaker, and it was said to ward away bad spirits and bad attitudes. And that's how we would ring in the new year. And of course, there's a lot of food, especially with Filipino like parties, there's always a lot of food and a lot of family present. And that sounds like this, feast of the new yam. You get rid of the old, yams, and you wash everything really good, and you bring in the new year, the new yam, the new yam. I think that's a really cool cultural kind of like tradition that I can relate to because I celebrate New Year's. And I wonder, can you relate? Do you do anything special for New Year's Eve or New Year's Day? Does it sound like this? Because this isn't a new year. It's part of the new harvest before they harvest their crops. So that's pretty cool. The New Yam Festival is thus an occasion for joy throughout Umofia, and every man whose arm was strong, as the Igbo people say, was expected to invite large numbers of guests from afar and wide. Okonkwo always asks his wives' relations, and since he now had 3 wives, his guests would make a fairly big crowd. But somehow, Okonkwo could never become as enthusiastic over feasts as most people. He was a good eater, and he could drink 1 of 2 fairly big gourds of palm wine, but he was always uncomfortable sitting around for days waiting for a feast or getting over it. He would be very much happier working on his farm. The festival was only 3 days away. Okonkwo's wives had scrubbed the walls in the huts with red earth until they reflected light. They had drawn patterns on them in white, yellow, and dark green. They then set about painting themselves with camwood and drawing beautiful black patterns on their stomachs and on their backs. The children were also decorated, especially their hair, which was shaved in beautiful patterns. The 3 women talked excitedly about the relations who had been invited, and the children reveled in the thought of being spoiled by these visitors from the motherland. Ikemefuna was equally excited. The New Yam Festival seemed to him to be a much bigger event here than in his own village, a place which was already becoming remote and vague in his imagination. So we've got a couple of things here. The New Yam Festival. You honor the earth goddess and ancestral spirits before the sea. We already did this. I did this on Friday. Whatever. You can't eat new yams until you honor the powers like the goddess and the ancestral spirits. And here are all the different traditions. The only person that's not happy is Okonkwo, because it's Okonkwo, and he hates being happy. He hates waiting around and being unproductive. He's very much not like his father Unoka. But I think it's like maybe that's a bad thing. Like, I know we said in class that Unoka is just bad individual, deadbeat father, and all that, and it's cool that Okonkwo doesn't want to be like him. But I think he takes it to the next extreme, But he does take it to the worst extreme. The festival is only. Oh wait, no, we did that. Oh yeah, Ikemefuna. We're talking about Ikemefuna. Ikemefuna, he's starting to forget about his homeland. He's starting to forget about like where he came from, Mbaino, because I guess he's getting more used to being part of Okonkwo's family. And also, the Yam Festival is a bigger celebration. I wonder, like, have you ever been to another family's place to celebrate a holiday you usually celebrate with your family, and they just do it differently? Like, maybe they go bigger, maybe they're a little bit more extra. That's kind of like how Ikemefuna feels. He's like, wow, in Mbaino, we never did it like this. This is cool. And then the storm burst. Okonkwo, who had been walking about aimlessly in his compound in suppressed anger, suddenly found an outlet. And this is why, kids, we try to share our emotions and be open and, seek therapy and different ways to express ourselves. Because if you're like Okonkwo and you're holding things in, when you do find an outlet, all of a sudden you're going to explode in the worst possible way. Who killed this banana tree? He asked. A hush fell on the compound immediately. Who killed this tree? Or are you all deaf and dumb? As a matter of fact, the tree was very much alive. Okonkwo's second wife had merely cut a few leaves off of it to wrap some food, and she said so. Without further argument, Okonkwo gave her a sound beating and left her and her only daughter weeping. Neither of the other wives dared to interfere beyond an occasional and tentative, "It is enough," Okonkwo pleaded from a reasonable distance. His anger thus satisfied, Okonkwo decided to go out hunting. He had an old rusty gun made by a clever blacksmith who had come to live in Umofia long ago. Okay, wait, back up. So he just beats his wife because he thinks that like because he thought that the banana tree was dead, but it wasn't. His wife just decided to cut some leaves off it, which is totally normal. And as a result, he beats his wife for God knows why. All right, backtrack. This is fufu. I mentioned that in the paragraphs beforehand. Fufu is kind of like it's pounded yam. You take the yams and you put them in a mortar and pestle and you pound it and it becomes this doughy kind of like thing. And then you eat it with like vegetable stew and spices and stuff like that. It sounds like when you make handmade tortillas and you eat it with birria and like mole and stuff like that. Like you eat, I don't even know you eat tortillas with mole. I don't remember. But yeah, so it's handmade, delicious food, and they have a lot of it at the festival. Okonkwo can't deal with that, or hey, he's not a party guy. Unoka, his father, was, but not Okonkwo. Quotes that stood out. So this is about the feast. We talked about the feast and like how it's important to the Igbo culture, and we tried to make a parallel. What is the celebration in your own culture? Like for me, it's New Year's. What is it for you when you celebrate a new beginning or something like that? And then this one is the Yam Festival seemed much bigger here than his own village. Think about Ikemefuna and how he's feeling towards this whole, tradition of another culture, another village. Yeah. All right. So Okonkwo takes a shot. There's a picture of banana tree. There's bananas and leaves, and it's totally normal. Like banana leaves are like the plastic wrap of the Igbo tribe. You wrap up your food in plastic if you want to preserve it, or if you want to cook it, you can steam it. So you got got tamales here. They're not wrapped in banana leaves, but they're wrapped in corn husks. It's kind of similar thing. But you know what is wrapped in banana leaves is this called suman. It's a Filipino dish. It's a kind of a dessert. It's like a sweet sticky rice. It could be savory, but usually it's sweet sticky rice, like served with sugar, and it's steamed in the banana leaves. It's super good. So yeah, like Okonkwo's second wife just wants to wrap up some food, and Okonkwo gets mad. It's like if like my mom wanted to wrap up today's leftovers, but my dad saw that she left the plastic wrap out. He's like, why is this out here? And then he beats her, which is, in my opinion, kind of absurd. But it looks like maybe in this culture that's a normal thing. It's a patriarchal culture, maybe, meaning the father or the male person in the household has more authority, has the most power. So he is angry, and after he beats his wife, he is satisfied. So his anger thus satisfied, Okonkwo decided to go out hunting. He had a rusty old gun made by a clever blacksmith who had come to live in Umuofia long ago. But although Okonkwo was a great man whose prowess was universally acknowledged, he was not a hunter. In fact, he had not killed a rat with his gun. And so, when he called Ikemefuna to fetch his gun, the wife who had just been beaten murmured something about guns that never shot. Unfortunately for her, Okonkwo heard it and ran madly into his room for the loaded gun, ran out again, and aimed at her as she clambered over the dwarf wall of the barn. He pressed the trigger, and there was a loud report, accompanied by the wail of his wives and children. He threw down the gun and jumped into the barn, and there lay the woman, very much shaken and frightened, but quite unhurt. He heaved a heavy sigh and went away with the gun. So, Okonkwo calmed down after he beat his wife the first time, but his wife was like, this guy's a jerk, and he calls him something, or like makes fun of him under her breath, and he hears it. And he gets pissed again, and he shoots at her. He doesn't hit her, because he's a terrible shot, but he shoots at her, and that is terrifying. In spite of this incident, the new Yam Festival was celebrated with great joy in Okonkwo's household. Early that morning, as he offered a sacrifice of new yam and palm oil to his ancestors, he asked them to protect him, his children, and their mothers in the new year. As the day wore on, his in-laws arrived from 3 surrounding villages, and after each party brought with them a huge pot of palm wine. and there was eating and drinking till night when Okonkwo's in-laws began to leave for their homes. The second day of the new year was the day of the great wrestling match between Okonkwo's village and their neighbors. It was difficult to say which the people enjoyed more, the feasting and fellowship of the first day, or the wrestling contest of the second. But there was one woman who had no doubt whatever in her mind. She was Okonkwo's second wife, Akwefi, whom he nearly shot. There was no festival in all the seasons of the year which gave her as much pleasure as the wrestling match. Many years ago, when she was the village beauty, Okonkwo had won her heart by throwing the cat in the greatest contest within living memory. That's from chapter 1. She did not marry him then because he was too poor to pay her bride price. But a few years later, she ran away from her husband and came to live with Okonkwo. All this happened many years ago. Now, Akwefi was a woman of 45 who had suffered a great deal in her time, but her love of wrestling contests was still as strong as it was 30 years ago. So, Akwefi was the village beauty, and I guess when she was young, she watched Okonkwo, as a wrestler, and she kind of fell in love with him, but Okonkwo couldn't pay the bride price, the cost of marrying her, so she married someone else until he was, more established, and then she ran away to him. Okay, that's a love story, I guess. It was not yet noon on the second day. Let me switch this up. So we're talking about Akwefi and her daughter Azinma. Akwefi, it was not yet noon on the second day of the New Yam Festival. Akwefi and her only daughter Azinma sat near the fireplace, waiting for the water in the pot to boil. The fowl Akwefi had just killed was in the wooden mortar. A chicken. The water began to boil, and in one deft movement, she lifted the pot from the fire and poured the boiling water over the fowl. She put back the empty pot on the circular pad in the corner and looked at her palms, which were black with soot. Azinma was always surprised that her mother could lift a pot from the fire with her bare hands. That's insane. So Akwefi just like, all right, I'm going to pluck the feathers off of this chicken. So she just takes a pot of boiling water, pours the water on the chicken, and puts it back. And she uses her bare hands, which is absurd. Akwefi, she said, is it true that when people are grown up, fire does not burn them? Azinma, unlike most children, called her mother by her name. Yes, replied Akwefi, too busy to argue. Her daughter was only 10 years old, but she was wiser than her years. But Nwoye's mother dropped her pot off of hot soup the other day and it broke on the floor. Akwefi turned the hen over in the mortar and began to pluck the feathers. So Akwefi is just too busy to answer this very annoying but adorable child's questions. Because yes, adults still do get burned, but she just doesn't have the time or energy to answer. I feel like that sometimes as a teacher. Sometimes kids just ask some strange questions. I'm just too tired to be giving them a long-winded answer. So I'm just like, yeah, it'd be like that. Akwefi turned the hen over in the mortar and began to pluck the feathers. Akwefi, said Azinma, who had joined in plucking the feathers, my eyelid is twitching. It means you're going to cry, said her mother. No, Azinma said, it is this eyelid, the top one. That means you will see something. What will I see? She asked. How can I know? Akwefi wanted her to work it out herself. Oh my God. Just like all your teachers. We want you to figure it out yourself. Oh, said Azinma at last. I know what it is. The wrestling match. At last the hen was plucked clean. Akwefi tried to pull out the horny beak, but it was too hard. She turned round on her low stool and put the beak in the fire for a few moments. She pulled again and it came off. Akwefi, a voice called from one of the other huts. It was Nwoye's mother, Okonkwo's first wife. Is that me? Akwefi called back. That was the way people answered calls from outside. They never answered yes for fear it might be an evil spirit calling. If I don't know who's calling, I don't even answer the phone. But if I do, I usually put on my neutral professional voice. I don't be like, yo, what's up? I'd be like, hello. It's my way of greeting people if I don't know who they are. So Akwefi is answering, is that me? Because I guess if you answer back yes, and it's an evil spirit, you're inviting that evil spirit in. It's kind of weird. But hey, that's culture. How do you greet people, right? Um, will you give Azima some fire to bring to me? Her own children and Ikemefuna had gone to the stream. Akwefi put a few live coals into a piece of broken pot, and Azima carried it across the clean-swept compound to Nwoye's mother. Thank you, Nma, she said. She was peeling new yams, and in a basket beside her were green vegetables and beans. Let me make the fire for you, Azima offered. Thank you, Azigbo, she said. She often called her Azigbo, which means the good one. Azima went outside and brought some sticks from a huge bundle of firewood. She broke them into little pieces across the sole of her foot and began to build a fire, blowing it with her breath. You will blow your eyes out, said Nwoye's mother, looking up from the yams she was peeling. Use the fan. She stood up and pulled out the fan, which was fastened onto one of the rafters. As soon as she got up, the troublesome nanny goat, which had been dutifully eating yam peelings, dug her teeth into the real thing, scooped out 2 mouthfuls, and fled from the hut to chew the cud in the goat's shed. Nwoye's mother swore at her and settled down again to her peeling. Azima's fire was now sending up thick clouds of smoke. She went on fanning it until it burst into flames. Nwoye's mother thanked her, and she went back to her mother's hut. Just then, the distant beatings of drums began to reach them. It came from the direction of the Ilo, the village playground. Every village had its own Ilo, which was as old as the village itself, and where all the great ceremonies and dances took place. The drums beat the unmistakable wrestling dance, quick, light, and gay, and it came floating on the wind. Okonkwo cleared his throat and moved his feet to the beat of the drums. It filled him with fire, as it had always done from his youth. He trembled with desire to conquer and subdue. It was like the desire for woman. That's a strong desire. We shall be late for the wrestling, said Azima to her mother. They will not begin until the sun goes down. But they are beating the drums. Yes, the drums begin at noon, but the wrestling waits until the sun begins to sink. Go and see if your father has brought out yams for the afternoon. He has, and Nwoye's mother is already cooking. Go and bring our own then. We must cook quickly, or we shall be late for the wrestling. Azima ran in the direction of the barn and brought back 2 yams from the dwarf wall. Akwefi peeled the yams quickly. The troublesome nanny goat sniffed about, eating the peelings. She cut the yams into small pieces and began to prepare a pottage using some of the chicken. At that moment, they heard someone crying just outside their compound. It was very much like Obiageli, Nwoye's sister. Is that Obiageli weeping? Okay, wait, back up. I've got way too much reading done. So it looks like the wrestling is coming down, and yeah, they're going to get ready for the wrestling. That's basically it. And something about the goat eating a yam without the permission of Nwoye's mother. Okay, that's cool. All right, there was nothing too important there. Just know that, you know, this is the day before the wrestling begins, or like not the day before. This is right before the wrestling begins, and they're getting ready to eat lunch before they go out to go to the wrestling match. And it looks like that they hear. Remember, Nwoye's mother, all of her kids had gone to get to water with Ikemefuna. So they're coming back now. Is that not Obiageli weeping? Akwefi called across the yard to Nwoye's mother. Yes, she replied. She must have broken her water pot. The weeping was now quite close, and soon the children filed in, carrying on their heads various sizes of pots suitable to their years. Ikemefuna came first with the biggest pot, closely followed by Nwoye and his 2 younger brothers. Obiageli brought up the rear, her face streaming with tears. In her hand was a cloth pad on which the pot should have rested on her head. So there's a little picture there of, you know, people carrying the water pots, and that is the fire that Azima helped bring to Nwoye's mom. What happened? Her mother asked, and Obiageli told her mournful story. Her mother consoled her and promised to buy her another pot. Nwoye's younger brothers were about to tell their mother the true story of the accident when Ikemefuna looked at them sternly and they held their peace. Ha! So basically, the little girl is lying. She's not really sad. She's afraid of Okonkwo, but she wasn't sad because the fact was that Obiageli had been making inyanga with her pot. I want to say that that's like mischief, or like she was playing around. She had balanced it on her head, folded her arms in front of her, and began to sway her waist like a grown up young lady. When the pot fell down and she broke, she burst out laughing. She only began to weep when they got near the Iroko tree outside the compound. The drums were still beating, persistent and unchanging. Their sound was no longer a separate thing from the living village. It was like the pulsation of its heart. It throbbed in the air, in the sunshine, and even in the trees, and filled the village with excitement. Kwefi ladled her husband's share of the pottage into a bowl and covered it. Azima took it to him in his obi. So, yeah, kids being kids, you know. So now, Azima is going to take the food to Okonkwo, because I guess it's the duty of the wives to provide Okonkwo food. Okonkwo was sitting on a goat sitting already, eating his first wife's meal. Obiageli, who had brought it from her mother's hut, sat on the floor waiting for him to finish. Azima placed her mother's dish before him and sat with Obiageli. "Sit like a woman," Okonkwo shouted at her. Azima brought her 2 legs together and stretched them in front of her. So I imagine that Azima went to go sit like this, you know, crisscross applesauce. And she ended up sitting like this because Okonkwo yelled at her, because this is the proper way for little girls to sit, with her legs closed and outstretched in front of her. "Father, will you go see the wrestling?" Azima asked after a suitable interval. "Yes," he answered. "Will you go?" "Yes." And after a pause, she said, "Can I bring your chair for you?" "No, that is a boy's job." Okonkwo was especially fond of Azima. She looked very much like her mother, who was once the village beauty, but his fondness only showed on very rare occasions. "Obiageli broke her pot today," Azima said. "Yes, she has told me about it," Okonkwo said between mouthfuls. "Father," said Obiageli, "people should not talk while they are eating, or pepper may go down the wrong way." "That is very true. Do you hear that, Azima? You are older than Obiageli, but she has more sense." He uncovered the second wife's dish and began to eat from it. Obiageli took the first dish and returned to her mother's hut, and then Nkechi came in, bringing the third dish. Nkechi was the daughter of Okonkwo's third wife. In the distance, the drums continued to beat. Okay, so in that one, that last part, we read about Okonkwo's kind of his very strict views on gender roles in society. So part of culture is, the gender roles. Boys do this, girls do that. And Okonkwo has a very black and white view. Like, for example, when Azima sits down, she has a way that she should be sitting as a girl. And Okonkwo points that out. You need to sit with your legs closed and out in front of you instead of crisscrossed. And then he also says, she also asks if she can bring his chair, and he's like, "No, that's a boy's job." I don't know why. I can kind of guess why the sitting thing might be a rule, but I can't figure out the chair thing. I don't know why. And I hope that you're thinking about, like, when you have cultural norms, what is the source of them? Why? Because I can think of why it's like maybe a girl crossing their legs isn't as appropriate as sitting closed, like with their legs closed. But I can't figure it out for the chair. What are some things you believe is okay for boys to do, and what are some things only girls can do? That's one of the questions that I think we should consider when we study culture, And remember, there is no right or wrong. This is just kind of how it is, and we want to understand where it's coming from, okay? All right, chapter 6. We're making good time. We're halfway through our readings, and we're halfway through our time together. So if there are any questions or any issues that come up, maybe I'm too soft-spoken, maybe I'm too loud, maybe I'm reading too fast, or maybe you don't have time to consider what we're talking about, let me know in the chat. All right, chapter 6. The whole village turned out on the Ilo. Men, women, and children. They stood round in a circle, huge circle, leaving the center of the playground free. The elders and grandees of the village sat on their own stools brought there by their young sons or slaves. Okonkwo was among them. All others stood except for those who came early enough to secure places on the few stands which had been built by placing smooth logs on forked pillars. Oh, check it out. Okonkwo is sitting court side. He's got front row seats to the action because he's one of the respected people of the village. He's got, probably Ike Mifuna carried his chair for him, and he's sitting there, probably getting to see all of the action while everyone else has to, they show up and they're seated by the time they show up. Or they're probably just standing. The wrestlers were not there yet, and the drummers held the field. They too sat just in front of the huge circle of spectators, facing the elders. Behind them was the big and ancient silk cotton tree, which was sacred. Spirits of good children lived in that tree waiting to be born. On ordinary days, young women who desired children came to sit under its shade. That is interesting. If you want children, you probably sit in the tree where the spirits of children hang out. That's how you become fertile and can have kids. I am sure that there are fertility, practices in our own culture and, that help a woman conceive. Fascinating. There were 7 drums, and they were arranged according to their sizes in a long wooden basket. 3 men beat them with sticks, working feverishly from one drum to another. They were possessed by the spirit of the drums. The young men who kept order on these occasions dashed about, consulting among themselves and with the leaders of the 2 wrestling teams, who were still outside the circle behind the crowd. Once in a while, 2 young men carrying palm fronds ran around the circle and kept the crowd back by beating the ground in front of them, or, if they were stubborn, their legs and feet. All right, hold up. Let's see. I gotta take some notes here. Okay, so we've got setting by the ring. So we've got Okonkwo gets courtside seating because he is respected. We have bouncers. Security keep the ring closing in. Like, they don't have like barriers or stanchions or anything like that. So you got these bouncers and security who keep the ring from closing too close using palm fronds. Let's get a picture of these palm fronds. Let's see. Insert image. Search the web. Palm frond. Yeah, those are palm fronds. Like, bam. Literally those things. Let's see what else. So we have got a drum line. Let's see. Okay. At last, the 2 teams danced into the circle and the crowd roared and clapped. The drums rose to a friendly. The people surged forward. The young men who kept order flew around, waving their palm fronds. Old men nodded to the beat of the drums and remembered the days when they wrestled to its intoxicating rhythm. The contest began with boys of 15 or 16. There were only 3 such boys in each team. They were not the real wrestlers. They merely set the scene. Within a short time, the first 2 bouts were over, but the third created a big sensation, even among the elders, who did not usually show their excitement so openly. It was as quick as the other 2, perhaps even quicker, but very few people had ever seen that kind of wrestling before. As soon as the 2 boys closed in, one of them did something which no one could describe because it had been as quick as a flash, and the other boy was flat on his back. It sounds like some martial art, like judo kind of stuff, right? The crowd roared and clapped, and for a while drowned the frenzied drums. Okonkwo sprang to his feet and quickly sat down again. 3 young men from the victorious boys team ran forward, carrying him shoulder high, and danced through the cheering crowds. Everybody soon knew who the boy was. His name was Maduka, the son of Obierka. Okay, so even Okonkwo gets excited. Like, he showed his emotion a little bit. Like, even Okonkwo shows his excitement when the boys' match ended in a quick... It's like a KO, right? Like, they came together and the dude was knocked out, and it's just a great show. Yeah, for anyone who's an MMA fan, those KOs are fun to watch. The drummers stopped for a brief rest before their real matches. Oh, there are opening fights featuring younger men. Yeah, there's opening matches. That's pretty cool. Bam. They all okay. The bodies shone with sweat, and they took up fans, began to fan themselves. They also drank water from the small pots and ate cola nuts. They became ordinarily human beings again, talking and laughing among themselves and with others who stood near them. The air, which had been stretched out, taut with excitement, relaxed again. It was as if water had been poured on the tightened skin of a drum. Many people looked around, perhaps for the first time, and saw those who stood or sat next to them. "I did not know it was you," Akwefi said to the woman who had stood shoulder to shoulder with her since the beginning of the matches. "I do not blame you," said the woman. "I've never seen such a large crowd of people. It is true that Okonkwo nearly killed you with his gun?" "It is indeed true, my dear friend. I cannot yet find a mouth with which to tell the story. Your chi is very much awake, my friend. And how is my daughter, Zinma?" "She has been very well for some time now. Perhaps she has come to stay." "I think she has. How old is she now?" "She is about 10 years old." "I think she will stay. They usually stay if they do not die before the age of 6. "I pray she stays," said Akwefi with a heavy sigh. Okay, so Akwefi knows someone in the crowd. She's watching wrestling, and she doesn't notice this person until things start to calm down during the intermission before the main fight. The woman whom she talked was called Chielo. She was the priestess of Agbala. Okay, priestess of Agbala. Chielo. I remember Agbala is the Oracle of the Hills, so this must be the new priestess of the Oracle of the Hills. In ordinary life, Chielo was a widow with 2 children. She was okay, so ordinary life. She is widow, 2 kids, shares a stall in the market with Zinma, Akwefi, and she loves Azima as if it were her own. Okay. Azima, whom she called my daughter, no, she was very friendly with Akwefi, and they shared a common shed in the market. She was particularly fond of Akwefi's only daughter, Azima, whom she called my daughter. Quite often, she bought bean cakes and gave Akwefi some to take home to Azima. Anyone seeing Chielo in ordinary life would hardly believe she was the same person who prophesied when the spirit of Agbala was upon her. The drummers took up their sticks, and the air shivered and grew tense like a tightened bow. The 2 teams were ranged facing each other across the clear space. A young man from one team danced across the center to the other side and pointed at whomever he wanted to fight. They danced back to the center together and then closed in. There were 12 men on each side, and the challenge went from one side to the other. 2 judges walked around the wrestlers, and when they thought they were equally matched, stopped them. So if the judges saw that it was a draw, like they were 2 equally matched, no one was going to win, they stopped it after a certain time. 5 matches ended this way. So of the 12 matches, 5 of them ended with draws. But the really exciting moments were when a man was thrown. The huge voice of the crowd then rose to the sky and in every direction. It was even heard in the surrounding villages. The last match was between the leaders of the teams. They were among the best wrestlers in all the 9 villages. The crowd wondered who would throw the other this year. Some said Okafo was the better man. Others said he was not the equal of Ikazue. Last year, neither of them had thrown the other, even though the judges had allowed the contest to go on longer than was the custom. They had the same style, and one saw the other's plans beforehand. It might happen again this year. So these are the 2 best warriors, and they both have the same fighting style. Okay. Dusk was already approaching when their contest began. The drums went mad, and the crowds also. They surged forward as the 2 young men danced into the circle. The palm fronds were helpless in keeping them back. Ikizue held out his right hand. Kafo seized it and they closed in. It was a fierce contest. Ikezue strove to dig in his right heel behind Okafo so as to pitch him backwards in the clever Ege style, but the one knew what the other was thinking. The crowd had surrounded and swallowed up the drummers, whose frantic rhythm was no longer a mere disembodied sound, but the very heartbeat of the people. The wrestlers were now almost still in each other's grip. The muscles on their arms and their thighs and on their backs stood out and twitched. It looked like an equal match. The two judges were already moving forward to separate them when Ikezue, now desperate, went down quickly on one knee in an attempt to fling his man backwards over his head. It was a sad miscalculation. Quick as the lightning of Amadora, Okafo raised his right leg and swung it over his rival's head. The crowd burst into a thunderous roar. Okafo was swept off his feet by supporters and carried home shoulder high. They sang his praise and the young women clapped their hands. Who will wrestle for our village? Okafo will wrestle for our village. Has he thrown 100 men? He has thrown 400 men. Has he thrown 100 cats? He has thrown 400 cats. Then send him word to fight for us. Wow, what a big ending to Chapter 6. It was a wrestling match, and it ended when this dude swung his leg over and countered, what the other guy was doing. That's pretty cool. That was a really simple chapter. I didn't really get much from it besides like the importance of wrestling as a culture to these people. Like sports and entertainment is important to this culture, just like it kind of is for us. I'm sure like anyone who's watched the MMA fights or Raiders playing or the Golden Knights know that culture usually has some form of entertainment as part of the culture. So in this one, it's wrestling. That's all I've got. I'm going to spruce up this PowerPoint in preparation for class on Thursday and Friday. So if you were watching, I appreciate you for being here. This feels exactly like Friday. No interaction, just how it is. But I know I caught a lot of you blindsided with this stream. So I promise Friday will be back to normal because I will have my life together and I'll actually press go live this time. So thank you everyone for being here. I hope that this helps you and that those of you who missed class or haven't done the reading can look at this video and understand chapter 5 and 6. It's pretty simple. If there were any questions, I would answer them. But for the most part, what you need to know is that we are learning about Okonkwo's culture in preparation for what happens next in the novel. This is part 1. It's all building it up. We want to really understand Okonkwo's culture and where it's coming from. And then we are, as the book says, we're going to watch things fall apart. All right, everyone, you have a great day. I will see you in class. Thank you so much for your views, your participation, and you'll have